Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations.
We turn now once again to Malachi Martin, who incredibly predicted a great number of things happening in the church today, including synodality and the rest of it. But now we turn to his prediction, Pope Francis himself. You see, back in the late 1980s, he published a book called The Keys of This Blood. And some of it is going to ring very familiar to you. He wrote about how, in his estimation, John Paul II saw himself as not only sort of Pope of the Catholic Church, but also the sort of de facto head of world religions in a way that screams ecumenical dialogue. And you've been reading the account of that. Malachi Martin, you can tell, is sort of okay with it, kind of, because it's clear that such a leadership of world religions does come up to the line on what is acceptable for a Catholic pope or not. My money is actually on the not side, because that his description of that work sounds tame in comparison to what we hear Francis doing now. Much of the work is there. In the previous episodes most recent of my examination of Malachi Martin's warnings for the church come from the Keys of This Blood. Because in those chapters you see a plan from the modernists is already out there to do much to the church that we have seen already. I invite you to go watch those again. But here now, we get his warning about their intent to put on the throne of Peter a pope who enthrones the spirit of Vatican II, who embodies the spirit of Vatican II himself. And while listening to this, if you're familiar with the work of the Permanent Instruction of the Alta Vendita, work by Italian stonecutters, which was found in the hands of the Pope, found its way into the hands of the popes in their document on it in the 19th century, and published at the personal expense of first Pope Leo XIII and then Pope St. Pius X afterwards, in every language they could get it translated to warn the entire church. That plan is outlined in that book. Food for thought for those of you who think that Francis might himself be a member of that group. But now we turn to The Keys of This Blood by Father Malachi Martin and his incredible warning about a pope exactly like Francis. There is one other possible development within the Roman Catholic body that, if unchecked, could shatter its unity of structure. Briefly, this is the conclave election of a papal candidate whose policy would be to dissolve the unity and change the structure of the Roman Catholic Church by simply abandoning the exercise of the Petrine office and privilege on which the structural unity of the Church is built as a visible body, and by disassociating the approximately 4,000 bishops of the Church from their collegial submission to the papacy, the principle on which they have been, up to now, structured. All this would mean a new function for the Bishop of Rome, and not the traditional one. It would also entail a new relationship of all bishops, including the Bishop of Rome, to each other. If anyone doubts seriously that such an eventuality could come about, let him remember that no one would have seriously speculated during the 40s and 50s that a pope in the 60s would attempt to do away effectively with the elements that guaranteed the central happening of the Roman Mass, namely the reenactment or representation of Christ's sacrifice on Calvary. Yet that, according to reliable sources, is precisely what happened. There is a second reason why no one should consider far-fetched the third possibility outlined above. A serious consideration of the present situation with dispassionate eyes could very quickly reveal the grim fact of Roman Catholic life today. On the universal level of parish and diocese, and on the superior level of papacy and papal ministry, we will find present all the dispositive elements required and sufficient to bring this dire development to fruition. Indeed, we will find these elements have already been working intensively and extensively. On the level of parish and diocese, and rife among bishops, priests, nuns, and lay people, we will find an unshakable persuasion that before the Second Vatican Council, there was one Roman Catholic Church, the pre-conciliar Church, but that since the Council, the pre-conciliar Church has ceased to exist, and its place has been taken by the conciliar Church, animated by the spirit of Vatican II, and no longer called the Roman Catholic Church, but instead called either in the biblical words, the people of God, or simply vaguely, the Church. We will find that the two churches are radically different in the minds of the bishop, priest, nun, and layperson, different on 4 capital points. The conciliar church lays no claim to exclusive possession of the means of eternal salvation. Non-Catholics as such and non-Christians as such can make equal claims to have the means of salvation within their own religion or quote-unquote way of life, if they happen to be religionless. For all of us, Catholics, non-Catholics, and non-Christians, are just pilgrims to the same goal, although approaching it by different roads. Second, in the conciliar church, the source of religious enlightenment, guidance, and authority is the local quote-unquote community of faith. Correct beliefs and correct moral practice no longer come from a hierarchic body of bishops submissive to the central teaching authority of one man, the Bishop of Rome. Third, the worldwide cluster of, quote, communities of faith have as their prime function to cooperate with, quote, mankind in building and assuring the success of world peace and world reform and the use of Earth's resources so as to eliminate economic oppression and political imperialism. Fourth, the former Roman Catholic Church rules of moral behavior about life issues, conception, marriage, death, the sins of the flesh, must be brought into fraternal alignment with the outlook, desires, and practices of the world at large. Otherwise, how can members of the Church claim to have opened up to their human brothers and sisters? Now, these two radical differences between the two churches are seen as the prime fruits of the Second Vatican Council, which is endlessly quoted in order to justify them. The horrible fact is that the documents of that council can be quoted to support these differences, for these documents are pockmarked with ambiguities in matters of faith, and in at least 2 of them, there are statements that prima facie seem irreconcilable with the constant teaching of the Roman Catholic Church and its popes up to the reign of Pope John the 23rd and the opening of the council. On the level of papacy and papal ministerial organization, we find elements that foment, protect, and give free rein to the aberrant, quote, spirit of Vatican II, rife on the parish and diocesan level. We find that 2 popes, Paul VI and John Paul II, did not exercise their supreme teaching privilege and authority in order to prevent the birth of the spirit of Vatican II, or once it started to flourish, refused to take the bull by the horns in the one way they and only they could do. For quite a long time now, Roman Catholics have needed a statement issuing from the personal power and privilege of the Pope, from his ex cathedra infallibility, once and for all and without ambiguity, telling all Catholics and all Christians, and for that matter the entire world, which of the 2 churches is the Orthodox one, which represents the Roman Catholic Church, the one and true church vindicated by so many popes and so many martyrs and so many saints. Needed, in other words, is the authoritative interpretation of the Second Vatican Council's official documents. But a papal statement cannot be mere words. The Church has been responding with words, and its atmosphere has been thick with documents and programs and reports every year since the end of the Second Vatican Council. There must be reinforcement of Catholic laws by means of the traditional sanctions known to all of us: excommunication, expulsion from official positions, name-by-name condemnation of the people, prelates, priests, theologians, nuns, lay people, who refuse to accept the papal statements. Both popes have refused to do this. Their neglect to do so has been excused or explained away by an attempt to maintain that they are preoccupied with more immediate or more important issues. But of the growing and spreading spirit of Vatican II, there blossom the baneful flowers of destruction for the Roman Catholic institutional organization. Its protection is the vital element in the Petrine office, both these pontiffs swore to defend as personal representatives of Christ. This is why the accusation of malfeasance in high office has been hurled against both pontiffs. They were judged as collaborating in the lethal endgame of those who intend to encompass the liquidation of the papacy and of the Roman Catholic institutional organization. Unchecked and unhindered, the development will go as follows. With the slow leavening of the bishops everywhere by the spirit of Vatican II, with no countervailing stance adopted by papal Rome, it is inevitable that what we now can see clearly in a restricted number of cardinals will permeate a greater and greater number. There is very little doubt in anybody's mind that cardinals such as Joseph Bernardin of Chicago, Basil Hume of Westminster, Godfrey Danneels of Belgium, Paulo Aristo Arns of Sao Paulo, Roger Etchegaray of France are partisans of the spirit of Vatican II. There are, to be sure, cardinals alive today who, together with more cardinals yet to be created by Pope John Paul II, will elect the pope who succeeds him. All will come into the next conclave from a church structure in which they have functioned for at least 25 years and where they not only did not curb or combat or even correct the aberrations of the spirit of Vatican II, but fomented it passively by doing nothing, or actively because they shared that same spirit. They will come from dioceses where the vast majority of bishops will know nothing and will want to know nothing that doesn't cohere with the spirit of Vatican II. The parishes and dioceses behind them are already thoroughly leavened by that same quote-unquote spirit. Barring a last-minute miracle, their choice of papal candidate will be one of their number, whose papal policy will be to crown and confirm the official existence of the spirit of Vatican II. Such a cardinal validly elected as pope will have as a principle of action what Popes Paul VI and John Paul II apparently adopted as a temporary expedient, not to exercise the now outmoded Petrine privilege of office. Paul VI promulgated the documents of the Second Vatican Council and sat back while the Church was devastated by the impact of the bastardization employed by both his Vatican officials and by his bishops throughout the Church. John Paul II has again and again sanctified the Council documents with papal assurances that they now hold the norm for Catholic belief and behavior. Between those two popes, Paul VI and John Paul II, on the one hand, and the next pope, elected after John Paul II dies, there will be this difference. That new pope's deficiency in his high office will be the result of a conviction that the original papal and Petrine office as practiced by the Roman popes up to the last third of the 20th century was really nothing more than a time-conditioned result of cultural modes, extending way back hundreds of years, and that now is the time to downgrade its importance in order to free the spirit of Vatican II to mold the Church in an image that will suit the progressive mind of a new and far different age. Roman Catholics will then have the spectacle of a pope validly elected who cuts the entire visible body of the Church loose from the traditional unity and the papacy-oriented apostolic structure that the Church has hitherto always believed and taught was divinely established. The shudder that will shake the Roman Catholic body in that day will be the shudder of its final agony, for its pains will be from within itself, orchestrated by its leaders and its members. No outside enemy will have brought this about. Many will accept the new regime. Many will resist. All will be fragmented. There will be no one on earth to hold the fractioning members of the visible Roman Catholic body together as a living compact organization. Men will then be able to ask for the first time in the history of the Church, where is the visible body of the Church Christ founded? But there will be none visible. Church Christ founded will be in the same condition as on the day that the Apostle Philip encountered the Ethiopian official on the road from Jerusalem, and finding that this man had received the grace to believe in Jesus, baptized him at a wayside well. After that, Philip disappeared, and the official continued on his way. But now he was a living member of the Church of Christ, a participant in the mystical body of Christ, as surely as any Christian of 1,000 years later, who was baptized in one of Europe's cathedral baptistries and had his name registered as an official member of the visible church structure to be found everywhere around the cathedral. But for that Ethiopian official, there was no visible church structure. Actually, by that simple ceremony of entering the wayside stream with the Apostle Philip and accepting baptism in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, that official had joined an underground, the nascent Christian underground, against which already the first pogroms had been launched by the resident elder brother authorities, headed by a fiery rabbinical zealot named Saul of Tarsus, who, in the words of the same chapter of the Acts of the Apostles that tells of the Ethiopian's baptism, quote, wreaked havoc on the church, entering into every house and dragging men and women out and throwing them into servitude. For however or wherever the church founded by Christ survives and lives on, it is sure that it will live on. The whole brute strength of hell will not prevail against it. And the successor of Peter, whoever he is during those dire days, will finally be converted and will, as Jesus foretold after his resurrection, restore and bring back to spiritual strength the faith of his bishops and the people in the Church of Christ. A dire prediction? Nonsense, you think? I will remind you that if Francis is doing something these days that is remarkably incoherent, unless you understand that what he's doing is essentially trying to make a new church, that remarkably incoherent thing he's doing is trying to hold together the church in the name of unity, while also, by their own admission, making a new church, the synodal church. They call it the synodal church. I've quoted them in mainstream Catholic news articles many, many times saying that. They say the traditional Mass is not conducive and not compatible with the new ecclesiology of the Church. They say the ecclesiology, the theology of what the Church is and its relationship to the world, changed after Vatican II. That what the meaning of the Church is changed after Vatican II. When you start saying that stuff, as a bishop, you are saying there is a new church, that it's a new religion. You can take their word for it. They're the ones saying it. We're talking about figures like Cardinal Arthur Roche, who is the prefect for the dicastery of the liturgy. He's the one saying that. It's been echoed by others, high-ranking prelates. Take them at their word. We'll see how this all plays out. My suspicion is that Malachi Martin was wrong on one thing, that the church will be forced completely underground by this. I actually don't think that's going to happen with this. What I think is going to happen is that this attempt to essentially undo what they think are Christ's errors and the way he made the church will, of course, not go exactly well for them. That their whole project will collapse, and it will be a catastrophe when that happens. But the visible church structure will be there, and the cardinals of the church will have a whole mess on their hands and will be forced to, at that time, give us a decent pope who will begin the process of fixing the problem that they made themselves. But I could be wrong. Malachi Martin could be entirely right, that you will face a period of the church essentially being underground. After all, as I've covered here many times, there are prophecies of an ape of the church as well, a false church that the world will accept as the Catholic Church. We'll see what that looks like. I'm curious what you think about this, so let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.